want to turn over a little bit to Musumi, who works with Fairware and actually works with both stakeholders. So on this second round of the discussion, I'd like to introduce Musumi, who is the country, Musumi Sarangi, who is the country manager for India in Fairware, Nepal Kunabs, founder and CEO of Non, and Dr. Piriya, who is a water resource management specialist. Help us better understand this landscape. So, Musumi, you work with brands, very large brands, and with Fairware. You also work with factories. What are you seeing? What is the responsibility of brands in helping factories along this very technical journey and costly journey, as Avind pointed out?
Thank you, Belinda. I'll, at the outset, put a disclaimer. I'm not a water expert, so the technicalities, like I will also not pretend to understand all of it. But I will, try to respond in the landscape of human rights due diligence and environment, because both are very interconnected. A few pointers before I respond to you, Belinda, is, in our efforts to transition into a low carbon economy, if we do not have the eye for human rights, we are losing a battle. It is not a one-way traffic, so there is a need for integration of both human rights and environment due diligence in our purchasing and business practices. That's one. Second, I'll draw a bit from our morning plenary today on engagement. We have to address power in the room. The power between brands and suppliers, the power between suppliers and workers. It's not a uniform linear landscape we are talking about. So for engagement, we have to address the elephant in the room. And when we talk about engagement, we have to look at the power imbalance and how we have the right stakeholders in the table, speaking with equal legitimacy and equitability of voice, not just the seat at the table. Third, looking at the UNGP Principle 1, duty of the government. We speak a lot about duty of what brands need to do, what suppliers need to do, their roles. But if the duty of the government, which is the right to protect, does not create a baseline which is above the bare minimum, brands and suppliers will continue to escape the discussion, because you are setting benchmarks which are so low that I don't need to fight. I mean, it's already low. If minimum wages are still of a medieval age, what do workers fight for? Living wage is a very far off conversation in that sense. And the fourth that I want to highlight is the gendered impact of our business practices. I was looking at the ILO report. 60 million women are employed in the textile sector. And this is counted. What about the millions of countless home workers, workers in subcontracting firms that do not receive the recognition of being a worker even, and the impacts of climate and water degradation on their lives. Putting these 4 pointers, coming to what brands can do, the first 2 points are very micro, looking at your internal business practices. What you as your business can do is look at what are the harms that you are causing because of your practices. A lot of times we look at the external ecosystem, which is larger, many more stakeholders at play, and then we ask this question to ourselves, where should I start? Start with your own business practices. That is the least we can do as responsible business operators. That's one. Second, look at human rights or environmental rights not in the landscape or in the department of CSR, right? It's for long been in that department. It needs to be cross-cutting. The production manager needs to be equally aware of what needs to be done as the CSR manager, because it's not CSR, it's not philanthropy. It's your responsibility and should be intertwined with all the target settings of business. So unless you make it intertwined, like you have targets, if you want to achieve $100 million, then you get this incentive. You also have to put a target that human rights violation should not happen in producing this product, right? And that makes it more incentivized. That makes it a little more competitive, also for the internal business. Otherwise, it's a fight between your CSR department and your production manager and your design manager. Because for long, I mean, I've been working with suppliers now 8 years, and they tell me the CSR team comes and says, do this training, put up grievance mechanism. And when the production manager speaks to us, he says, nothing doing. You have only 30 days to produce this garment, and this is the price. And that price is not even a fair price with a decent profit margin. And to expect, and I'm not painting suppliers white sheep here, to expect suppliers from their lower margins to include the cost for human rights is a false idea, is an utopian idea. It would not happen in the real world. Brands, big businesses, where the money is, the accountability also should lie there. We have within Fairwear a very interesting visual representations of where, there's two cylindrical diagrams, one which is about 95% money and 5% accountability, and the other 5% money and 95% accountability. This is supplier, this is brand. So if this continues to remain the picture, things won't change. Yeah. And the third that I want to bring in is lobby with the government. And lobby not just by the civil society actors or organizations like the UN, by businesses. Lobby that we will continue to engage, and it is not the race to the bottom to the lowest price. No, the race is to look at risk and how do we address risk collectively. Because even governments want their economy to survive, right? Textiles for many economies is the driver. Now, they wouldn't want that this economy driver goes to a different country because of lower prices. And there will always be somebody who would produce lower than what you offer. So can we, as brands and businesses, also lobby with the government of continuing businesses and acknowledging that human rights risk violations are there, but we will collectively address it. And the last that I want to put onto the table is around access to remedy when it comes to any kind of violations, whether environment or human. How do we create channels which are functioning, not numbers on the board on a factory wall, right? Which nobody knows who will pick up, nobody knows what it is even for, but numbers or mechanisms which are functioning, numbers which actually look at remediation from a worker's lens, right? So this is a snapshot here. I want to present, Belinda, largely from a human rights lens. But like I said, these are not separate topics. Both human rights, water, environment are intertwined, and we need to look at it from the same lens rather than as separate, isolated, trajectories that needs its own intervention.
Exactly, and as Mr. Vinda mentioned, at the end of the day, yes, there is that cost element, but it's water, it's life. We all need it, right? So, thank you so much for the. I want to. I'm feeling a bit cheeky, and I'll ask maybe a follow-up question on: have you seen any case studies that you can point to of brands? It might be maybe in the human rights field, but something that we can learn from of how they have provided that support to their suppliers to address some of the, whether it's human rights or clean water risks.
I'll share an example around wages with a couple of Fairwear member brands are doing. So each country has this minimum wage, right? And the discourse around living wage is continuing now for decades. What should be the living wage? What are parameters to calculate a living wage? Who determines that living wage? A lot of conversations. Unfortunately, workers are not receiving any of these benefits of these conversations because it's still a conversation on how to calculate that number. It's important, I'm not undermining that, but is the worker benefiting from it is my question. Coming to the example, within Fairwear, what we've tried to also advocate with our member brands, Fairwear has around 140 small, medium-sized European brands as our members, that can we make a start, right? Because we know textiles is fragmented, we know textiles, one brand purchases from multiple factories located in multiple geographies, countries, it's not uniform. Can we make a start? So say, for example, a living wage in a city in India is hypothetically 10,000 baht, right? If that's the living wage, what is your contribution to that 10,000 baht? If you are taking 10% of the factory produce, you're doing 2 seasons, what is your percentage of contribution to the living wage? Let's start with that, right? And then probably build an ecosystem with the other brands to collaborate and see if we can make progress on attaining better, fair wages for workers. So some of our brands have been able to do that, where they are looking at what is their contribution to the figure and doing it, I wouldn't say in the most appropriate manner, because wages has further subdivisions in terms of social benefits that workers need to be provided, but they do it in terms of bonuses, sometimes once every 2 months, sometimes once every 4 months, 6 months, depending on the leverage. So there is a possibility to make progress. Like I said, start internally, start first. So that's something that we've been doing with some of our member brands. Not everybody has jumped to the bandwagon yet, which we hope, but some of our brands are doing that. But what is fundamental here is suppliers sometimes not agreeing to taking that bonus or the additional payment for their workers. Suppliers only agree when brands have long-term commitments with them. They have been engaging with those factories for a couple of years, because if tomorrow, say, a brand starts this new fancy project, does it for a year and goes back, I mean, the workers are going to continue to ask that from suppliers. Suppliers would not be able to give it. So they also are very, mindful of that ecosystem. That only when brands who procure from them, whatever the leverage might be, if there is a continued business, if there's a long-term business and there's a surety of business, only then even suppliers agree. So this is additional money. Even then suppliers won't agree, and I understand that pain. Coming from a production country, I understand their problems there. So it's fundamental, again, like I said, long-term relationships with your suppliers to work on human rights and environment violations, because you need transparency for it. You would need, when we say there's lack of transparency, how can I be transparent if I know the moment I open up to my violations or to my mistakes as an individual, I would be reprimanded, right? If I look at it a very micro, my own self, if I know I'm going to get scolded for something I do, I'll try to hide it. I'm human, right? But if I know you would help me address it, I would be more open to share with you what my shortcomings are, what my fallacies are. So that's the same in a very easy way that I'm trying to say. It's not that easy. That's the relationship between a brand and supplier. Unless there's trust, transparency, and the commitment to continue to engage even if there are fault lines, because trust me, supply chains in textiles have risks everywhere. So it's not that they move from here and they go to a much better supply chain. There might be some 5-10% differences, some higher on the learning curve, but it's more or less the same, because it's a micro small industry in most cases, employing one of the most vulnerable populations in the world. And that is why you produce here, you don't produce in Europe, right? There's a reason why you produce here. So I'm not getting into that debate here, but yeah, putting it on the table.
No, and it's a debate that I think is interesting, particularly because now that we're on this topic of salient risks, right? You're right. Textiles is an industry that has risks everywhere, right?